Welcome to Jazz Piano Skills. I'm Dr. Bob Lawrence. It's time to discover, learn, and play jazz piano. Well, I hope everyone has been enjoying playing the improvisational developmental patterns for the primary sounds of A flat, and of course, exploring the various fingering patterns that require a conscious shifting of the hand to establish a jazz articulation and to prepare the hand for continuous ascending or descending movement. Wow, that's a mouthful right there. Not an easy task, right? As I have said all along, it takes a serious commitment, endurance, and patience to develop proper hand movement in addition to nailing down the correct chord scale relationships. So if you are sticking to the program that we have been tackling since the start of the new year, a huge congrats. You are a member of a very small group of determined folks destined to achieve jazz success. So let's keep creating forward motion today and tackle the altered dominant sounds for A flat, sharp 11, flat 13, flat 9, flat 13, and of course the fully altered sound, flat 9, sharp 9, flat 5, sharp 5. Just as we have been doing since January with the altered sounds for C, F, B flat, and E flat. So today you are going to discover essential jazz improvisation exercises. You're going to learn developmental arpeggio and scale patterns of A flat altered sounds. And you're going to play 5 arpeggio and 5 scale patterns for the A flat dominant altered sounds of music. Dominant sharp 11, dominant flat 13, dominant flat 9, flat 13, and of course, dominant fully altered, flat 9, sharp 9, flat 5, sharp 5. So as I always like to say, regardless of where you are in your jazz journey, a beginner, an intermediate player, an advanced player, or even if you are an experienced and seasoned professional, you're going to find this Jazz Piano Skills podcast lesson exploring jazz improvisation exercises for A flat altered sounds to be very beneficial. But before we get down to business, I want to, as I always do at the beginning of every Jazz Piano Skills podcast episode, I want to welcome first-time listeners. And if you are indeed new to Jazz Piano Skills, I want to invite you to become a Jazz Piano Skills member. There are various membership plans to choose from, so visit jazzpianoskills.com to learn more about the perks that come along with each membership plan. There are educational weekly podcast packets, illustrations, lead sheets, play-alongs. There is a sequential jazz piano curriculum available that is loaded with comprehensive courses, an online weekly masterclass, interactive jazz fake book, private jazz piano skills community, which hosts a variety of engaging forums. And of course, there's unlimited private, personal, and professional educational support available as well. All of these perks are available at jazzpianoskills.com, waiting for you, wanting to help you discover, learn, and play jazz piano. So when you have a moment, check it out at jazzpianoskills.com and, of course, become a member. Once you get there, if you have any questions, by all means, please do not hesitate to contact me. I'm always happy to spend some time with you, answer any questions that you may have, or help you in any way that I possibly can. Okay, let's get to the question of the week. All right, this week's question comes from Mary Cooley from Scottsdale, Arizona. I love that area. It's warm. I have relatives living there. And I have a ton of great memories with my boys going to spring training every year, which, of course, is baseball heaven for all of us who love baseball. Wow, I'm already looking forward to next March. I love that area. Anyway, Mary's question is this. I hear jazz musicians talking about playing inside and outside. I am not quite sure what that means exactly. Could you please explain it in a way a beginner can understand? Also, is this something that can be practiced, developed? And if so, can you offer some suggestions on how best to successfully practice playing inside and outside? Thanks for considering my question. Wow. Another great question. And Mary, I am going to do my very best to be as clear and concise as possible. Your question is so good, and I know so many listeners appreciate it because they too seek some clarification regarding inside and outside playing as well. So let me begin by saying this. I could easily devote an entire podcast episode, if not several podcast episodes, discussing inside and outside playing. But I will try my very best today to condense my thoughts into a few minutes. All right? Okay, so here I go. The first thing to know is that the expression inside and outside playing is simply referring to playing notes that either coincide with the harmony inside or notes that do not coincide with the harmony outside. In other words, notes that create tension. Now, before I go any further, I want to stress, I cannot stress this enough, I want to stress how important it is that you focus on learning how to play using inside notes first that coincide with the harmony before you even begin to think about incorporating notes that are outside the harmony. You know, it's funny. I had a teacher one time ask me, Bob, how do you teach students to play wrong notes right? Funny, right? It's a great question. What he was asking was, how do I teach students to play outside? I told him that's a very easy question to answer. I told him, if you want to teach students how to play wrong notes right, teach them how to play right notes right first. So if you are not comfortable improvising through chord changes using chord tones and scale tones, inside notes, then don't even think about trying to play non-scale tones, outside notes. Bottom line, first things first. Learn how to play the right notes right. So, Mary, I want you to think about learning how to improvise in 3 stages. Stage 1, chord tones, using 4 chord tones, 4 inside notes. The root, the third, the fifth, and the 7th of the sound. Stage 2, begin using scale tones. Right? So now you get the chord tones plus 3 more inside notes. The 2nd, 4th, and 6th degrees of the scale. So now you would have 7 notes at your fingertips, the entire scale. Stage 3, you would begin to incorporate non-scale tones, which are 5 notes that reside outside of the harmony. So let's apply these 3 stages to the C major scale. Stage 1 would be the notes C, E, G, and B. 4 chord tones. The root, the third, the 5th, and the 7th. Stage 2 would include the entire scale. So it would add the notes D, F, and A. So you get 7 notes. And stage 3 would be all 12 notes, the chromatic scale. So you can kind of see, Mary, you start with stage 1, 4 inside notes, stage 2, 3 additional notes that are still inside scale tones, and then stage 3, the remaining 5 notes that fall outside of the scale. Now on the piano, you can see this very clearly, when you illustrate it in the key of C, because you have all white notes are the inside notes, and the 5 black notes are the outside notes. Last week I presented an equation that went like this: chord tones plus rhythm equal melody. That would be stage 1. Now we can expand that equation. Chord tones plus scale tones plus rhythm equal melody. That would be stage 2. And we can expand it yet again. Chord tones plus scale tones plus non-scale tones plus rhythm equals melody, which would be stage 3. Now, here's another way to think about it. Stage 1 equals chord tones only. Stage 2 equal chord tones plus scale tones. Stage 3 equal chord tones plus scale tones plus non-scale tones. All of this to say, Mary, when you hear people talking about playing outside, they are referring to stage 3, using the 5 non-scale tones. Now, the second part of your question was about how to go about practicing outside playing. Now, there are several ways to begin doing this. I would suggest beginning with the half-step approachment to a chord tone. Now, not all half-step approaches to a chord tone are outside, but it's a great place to begin. So again, for using C major as an example, I could approach my chord tone, the 3rd, with a half step. So approaching that E with the E flat, there's my outside note, the half step approachment, resolving to the E, and then continuing up to the 5th and the 7th, right? I could do the same thing with the 5th. So half step approachment to my G, the F sharp, outside, resolving inside to the G, and then continuing with my chord tones, the 7th, and then the root, right? I could go descending, right? I could do that F sharp to the G and descend, right? Or half step approachment to the B and descend through chord tones, right? A really easy way to begin incorporating some tension into your improvisation by just simply adding a half step approachment to the chord tones, the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th. And again, not all half-step approaches to chord tones are outside, but it's a nice place to begin. Another great place to begin is with the altered dominant scales, which of course we are exploring today for A flat. The name itself, altered dominant, communicates that you are playing a sound, you are playing notes that have been altered to create tension. And as I mentioned earlier, notes that create tension are outside of the harmony. They are outside notes. So when playing altered dominant scales, you are automatically playing outside. You are automatically playing notes that create tension, that reside outside of the harmony. There are, of course, other ways to begin gaining familiarity and comfort with outside notes, but for now, as a beginner, Mary, thinking half-step approachments to chord tones and beginning to explore and utilize the altered dominant scales, as we're going to do today, there are 2 great places to begin. One last but very important point I want to make. outside notes must resolve to an inside note. If your outside note remains outside and does not resolve, we simply call it a wrong note. So keep this in mind as you begin to wander outside with your playing. You must come back inside if you want your playing to sound correct. Okay? Again, I need to devote an entire episode or episodes to this fantastic question. Nevertheless, I hope this helps Mary as a brief introduction. And as always, if further clarification is needed, of course, please let me know. Wow, great question. And I want to encourage all of you Jazz Piano Skills listeners to send me your questions. Just email me at drlawrencejazzpianoskills.com, drlawrence@jazzpianoskills.com. Send me your questions, and who knows? Your question just may be the next question of the week. All right, let's get busy. Let's discover, learn, and play jazz piano. Let's get after these jazz improvisation exercises for the altered A-flat dominant sounds. As I mentioned in previous podcast episodes, students struggle with improvisation more often than not because of poor fingerings, right? Not a lack of skill, not a lack of theory understanding, but simply due to immobile hands, which of course result from poor fingerings. This is why we are devoting this entire year, right, to addressing this issue, working on fingerings, utilizing improvisational patterns to help us develop muscle memory with good fingerings so that our improvisation can begin to flourish, right? The whole point of our journey is to establish definitive answers to questions like, what constitutes good fingerings? What should we look for when establishing a fingering for a certain musical phrase? What should we be trying to accomplish with our fingerings? Is there always a fingering option that will reign supreme over other options? Are the golden rules of fingering, such as no thumb, avoid the thumb on a black note, should that ever be violated? Right? These are really important questions, and we're dealing with these types of questions throughout the entire year as we move from one note to the next note to the next note with our primary sounds and with our altered sounds. Bottom line, we want to establish a fingering conviction that will allow us to begin to successfully practice in establishing fingerings for all 60 chords using typical jazz patterns, right? And in doing so, of course, we develop fingering muscle memory that ultimately frees us up to think about musical expression, musical emotion, musical articulation, and musical creativity, right? So we started this fingering liberation back in January, and we continue it today with A-flat altered sounds. The sharp 11, the flat 13, flat 9, flat 13, and of course the fully altered flat 9, sharp 9, flat 5, sharp 5. So we got a lot to do today, right? We got a lot to get done, so let's get down to business. Here we go. The educational agenda for today is as follows. Number 1, we are going to explore jazz improvisation exercises for A-flat altered sounds. Number 2, we will play essential A-flat altered arpeggio patterns that you need to discover, learn, and play from the root to the 13th of the sound using various entry points, the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th. Number 3, we will play essential A-flat altered scale patterns that you need to discover, learn, and play from the root to the 13th of the sound. And again, using various entry points, the root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th. Number 4, I will be playing all the jazz improvisation exercises today using the A-flat 7 sharp 11 sound. And number 5, I will be playing all jazz improvisation exercises using a traditional swing groove of 110. Okay? So if you are a Jazz Piano Skills member, I want you to take a few minutes right now, hit the pause button. I want you to download and print your podcast packets, the illustrations, the lead sheets, and the play-alongs. Your membership, right? Your membership grants you access to all the educational podcast packets if you are a Trio member, right? For every weekly podcast episode. And as I mention every week, you should be using these podcast packets when listening to this episode. And of course, you should be using them when practicing these skills at the piano as well. So if you are listening to this podcast on any of the popular podcast directories, such as Apple or Google, Amazon, Spotify, the list goes on, iHeartRadio, Pandora, so on, then be sure to go to jazzpianoskillspodcast.com. Go directly to jazzpianoskillspodcast.com to access, download, and print your podcast packets. And you will find the active download links in the show notes. All right, one final but very significant note that I mention every week. If you are listening and you're thinking that the jazz improvisation exercises for A-flat altered sounds are just skills that are just way over your head, that you have no business, you're thinking you have no business to try to discover, learn, and play the A-flat altered sounds, I would say to you then, please relax, breathe in, breathe out, no worries. Right? Continue to listen. Continue to grow your jazz piano skills intellectually by just listening to this episode. Every new skill is over our heads when first introduced, but this is how we get better in any discipline, right? We place ourselves smack dab in the middle of conversations where we have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. We're hearing terms that we've never heard before, and so it forces us to grow intellectually. I say it all the time. All musical growth begins upstairs mentally, conceptually, before it can come out downstairs physically in your hands. So the first order of business always is to just simply listen to the podcast lesson now to discover and learn. The play will come in time. It always does. I guarantee it. Okay, now that you have your lead sheets in your hands, I want to point out just a few things before we dig in. You will see that lead sheets 1 through 4 deal with arpeggio motion, while lead sheets 5 through 8 get after the scale motion. You will also notice that the jazz improvisation exercises, as always, are the same for all 4 altered A-flat dominant sounds, for the sharp 11, the flat 13, flat 9, flat 13, and the fully altered sound. The exercises are modified, of course, to reflect the proper sound. Okay? You will also notice that my suggested fingerings, are included for every note of every exercise, for every sound. Now, you may modify the fingerings, right? But be careful. Remember, fingerings are what allow you to play with proper jazz articulation, and these fingerings have intentional hand shifts incorporated into the patterns, right? Into the fingerings. So do not be adjusting the fingerings to remove them, because you will actually be working against our objective and our goal of establishing mobility, creating mobility in your hand by this constant hand shifting that is required with these fingerings. All right? So if you do modify it, just be careful, right? And always keep in mind that you may be thinking that you're creating an easier fingering that actually may end up making it harder for you down the road. Okay? So I'm just throwing this out to you as caution to the wind, so to speak, right? Just be careful. All right, so I want you to, in your lead sheet packet, I want you to grab skill 1 and I want you to grab scale 5, and I want you to pull those out of your packet. Scale 1 deals with the dominant sharp 11 arpeggio patterns. Scale 5 deals with the dominant sharp 11 scale patterns. I am going to be playing these 5 arpeggio exercises and 5 scale exercises today for the sharp 11 sound. Of course, I do not have time to play through all the other altered sounds, but that's going to be what you do this week, right? So I'm just going to model for you these patterns in A flat for the sharp 11. Your job is to play these patterns for all of the altered sounds, okay? So let's start with pattern A, letter A on scale 1, lead sheet 1. These are simple 4-note arpeggios, inside notes, right? For some of these arpeggios, as soon as the sharp 11 enters in, we have an outside note. See how that works? So we have 4-note arpeggios with entry point of the root, an entry point of the third, the fifth, and the 7th. So I'm going to bring the ensemble in. I'm going to play 4 measures up front just to establish the groove, the feel, the time. Then you will hear me play each pattern there on the lead sheet in letter A 4 times. So I'll play the arpeggio starting with the root entry 4 times, then move to the arpeggio with the third entry 4 times, and so on. Okay? So let's just sit back and listen and see what this sounds like, the A flat 7 sharp 11 sound. And one thing I will say before we dig in, the sharp 11 sound, any of these altered sounds might sound harsh. They might sound a little rough to the ears because these altered sounds are outside notes, okay? But also remember, we're not resolving these really, right? This A flat 7 sharp 11 sound, we're not resolving it to a D flat major or some other resolution, right? So we've kind of isolated this altered sound by itself in order so that we can practice these finger patterns. So keep that in mind, okay? All right, so let's bring the ensemble in. Let's listen to letter A, 4 arpeggios, root, third, fifth, and 7th entry. Here we go. Each one of these 4-note arpeggios has the fingerings create an intentional hand shift, right? So you do not want to alter those fingerings to remove that. Some of you may be thinking, well, why do I need to put a hand shift in there because I'm only playing 4 notes? So why can't I just play the arpeggio 1, 2, 3, 5 or something, right? And avoid shifting the hand at all. Again, that's not the point. What we're trying to do is establish this, get comfortable with our hand moving across the keys, even when playing a 4-note arpeggio. Okay, so now look at letter B. We take the same concept. We just create a little contour to our arpeggio. So we have a little ascending, descending, ascending motion, but it's still an arpeggio that goes from the root to the seventh. It goes from the third to the ninth, from the fifth to the 11th, and from the 7th to the 13th of the sound. So we cover the entire sound using 4 different entry points. All right, so let's bring the ensemble in and listen to letter B. Follow along on your lead sheet and take note of where those fingerings are creating hand movement. Okay? All right, here we go. So let's move on to letter C. Letter C has much more contour. I love this pattern because our hand, the hand shifting is pretty obvious with this pattern. Okay, like look at the root entry here. We have 1 4 1 4 2 1. So our hand is literally shifting 1 4. We have to let go of our E flat to get our thumb to the C, right? So we want to play that line with the hand shift, but have a nice articulation and a nice legato feel to our 8th note pattern here, right? And again, root entry, 3rd entry, 5th and 7th entry, exploring the entire sound from the root all the way through the 13th, all right? So let's bring the ensemble in and let's listen to letter C. Here we go. Until now, everything's been 8th note patterns, but now letter D, we have 8th notes, but triplets, right? 8th note triplets. So again, pay attention to the fingerings here and the hand shifting that is taking place in these patterns. Again, root, third, fifth, and seventh entry, so that we explore the entire sound from the root to the 13th. I'm playing today, as I mentioned earlier, a tempo of 110. I say this every week. I'm going to say it again today. Practice these patterns at slower tempos, 60, 70, 80, so that you can focus on the fingering and the movement of the hand. Once you're comfortable with the fingering and the movement of the hand, then you can begin increasing the tempo. Now, one other note here. If you've been doing this program since January, doing all of our fingerings for C, F, B flat, and E flat, hopefully, right, we've kept these patterns the same. So that variable remains the same. That's a constant. We don't change that. We have enough to deal with the changing of the fingerings as we move into these different key centers, right? So we keep these patterns the same. So hopefully your ears are starting to guide you as well. So this is not really about a reading exercise. These patterns are not about reading, developing your reading skills. So if you find yourself, your ears are guiding you through these patterns and you're familiar with the chord scale relationship and playing it, letting your ear kind of take the driver's seat, that's fantastic. That's wonderful. Again, the objective with all of these patterns that we are doing, whether it's arpeggio motion or scale movement, the objective here is fingerings, right? It's our fingerings that we're focusing on. So, okay, with all that being said, let's bring the ensemble in. Let's listen to these eighth note triplets in letter D. Here we go. Triplets give you fits. Don't panic. They give everyone fits. That's not an easy pattern. It's not an easy rhythm, I should say, to play consistently with a nice, relaxed jazz articulation. It takes time. So if it's giving you fits, these eighth note triplets, join the club. No worries. Keep at it. It will start to settle in for you, I promise. Okay, so now our last arpeggio exercise for today, letter E. We're back to eighth notes, but our line has been extended. Our eighth notes now, we have a motif that extends into the second measure. There are multiple hand shifts taking place in these patterns, so pay attention to that. Again, root entry, third entry, fifth, seventh. That takes us through the entire sound from the root to the 13th. So let's listen to 8 flat 7, sharp 11, arpeggio pattern, letter E. Here we go. halfway home today, right? We've looked at 5 arpeggio patterns for the A flat 7 sharp 11 sound. And now we're going to turn our attention to patterns that include scale movement. We're going to follow the same approach with a root entry that goes from the root to the 7th, third entry that takes us to the 9th, fifth entry that takes us to the 11th of the sound, and then a 7th entry that takes us all the way to the 13th of the sound. You know, I always like to practice like this. When I practice arpeggios, I practice scales, relating it to a specific sound, I'm always going to explore the entire sound, right? As I want you to get used to thinking that way. Regardless of what skills that we are working on, you want to explore the entire sound. So let's bring the ensemble in. Let's listen to our A flat 7 sharp 11 sound. I'm going to play just straight scale movement from the root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th. So here we go. Check it out. Okay, so now that we're familiar with the A flat 7 sharp 11 sound and the fingerings for that sound from the root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th, now we can begin adding a little contour to our scale as we do in letter B and challenge ourselves with a little different finger patterns. But again, creating hand shifts the entire time, right, through each motif from the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th. So as you'll see there in letter B, we create a contour right away. We have a leap right on beat 1, count 1, from the A flat up to the E flat, and then right into our sharp 11 sound from there. So let's bring the ensemble in and let's listen to letter B. Again, pay attention to where those hand shifts are taking place with our fingerings. All right, here we go. we always have an eighth note triplet pattern included in our arpeggios. We have eighth note triplet patterns included with our scale movement. And letter C, here it is, right? Letter C, we have triplets on all eighth note triplets on all 4 beats of the measure, ascending from the root to the 7th, from the 3rd to the 9th, from the 5th to the 11th, and from the 7th to the 13th. Again, as I mentioned earlier, eighth note triplets are tricky, so if they give you fits, don't feel bad. It's a tough rhythm to play, especially when they're linked. They're several in a row, like all linked together, like we have here at letter C. So with that being said, let's bring the ensemble in and let's listen to A flat 7 sharp 11, eighth note triplets, ascending motion from the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th. Here we go. So now letter D. Before we jump in on letter D, I want to again just reiterate what I mentioned earlier was that, we're dealing with altered sounds here, right? Isolated altered sounds. So if some of this is tough for the ear to digest, just know that that's normal, right? It's normal. Especially the sharp 11 sound. I think actually out of all the altered sounds, the sharp 11 sound, at least for me, when I was learning my altered sounds, the sharp 11 sound for some reason was the one that was the hardest one for me to wrap my ears around for some reason. I love it now. It sounds great. I use it all the time. But at the beginning, the sharp 11 sound was tough for me. So if you're finding that you're in that camp as well, hang in there. It will get better, I promise. So letter D, same format as we've been doing all day. Root, 3rd, 5th, 7th entry. Primarily ascending scale motion. There's some contour here with these motifs. And again, this motif now extends through all of measure 1 into measure 2. So our melodic lines are getting longer. So here we go. Let's bring the ensemble in and listen to letter D. Here we go. down to our final fingering exercise for today. Letter E, scale motion. And again, our melodic lines, our motifs just keep getting longer, right? All eighth note movement again. Multiple hand shifts taking place within these lines, so pay attention to that. And again, as we've been doing all day, dealing with the A flat 7 sharp 11 sound, various entry points from the root 3rd, 5th, and 7th so that we explore the entire sound to the 13th. All right, so let's wrap it up with letter E. Here we go. As always, right? As always, I feel like I'm running a sprint to get through everything in one short and very fast hour. Now, even though I played the exercise today using the dominant sharp 11 sound, be sure to practice these exercises for the remaining altered sounds, the flat 13, the flat 9, flat 13, and the fully altered sound, the flat 9, sharp 9, flat 5, sharp 5. Right? Practice all of these altered sounds and all of these patterns. Now, they are all laid out for you in your lead sheets packet with the fingerings included for every note. Right? Remember, you can modify the fingerings slightly to suit your hand best, but just be careful, right? Do not be removing hand shifts, right? If you remove one, put one in, right? So do not be removing the hand shifts because you're working against the very goal, the very objective that we have by doing these exercises, and that is to establish muscle memory that supports hand mobility, okay? You have a ton to practice this week, no doubt about it. You have your primary sounds from last week. Now you have your altered sounds this week for A flat. So you have a ton to practice. Next week, as we always do, we will explore a bebop tune, right? And explore the melody, the fingerings of a bebop head, and closely examine the various melodic shapes that particular tune has to offer us with regards to fingering development and, of course, with regards to improvisation development. Once again, I want to encourage you Jazz Piano Skills members, you trio members, to use your podcast packets, not just the lead sheets, right? Tackle those illustrations and utilize those play-alongs to guide you as you study and practice these patterns and these fingerings, right? These are educational tools that will help you gain a mastery of the jazz piano skills, right? Conceptually, physically, and of course, musically. As always, I want to encourage everyone, be patient. Developing mature professional jazz piano skills takes time. So begin structuring your improvisation practicing, your fingering practicing after the playing demonstrations that I modeled for you today in this podcast episode, and I guarantee it, you will begin to see, you'll begin to feel and hear your progress. Well, I hope you have found this Jazz Piano Skills podcast lesson, exploring jazz improvisation exercises for A-flat altered sounds, to be insightful and, of course, to be beneficial. Don't forget, if you are a Jazz Piano Skills Ensemble member, I'll see you online Thursday evening at the Jazz Piano Skills Masterclass. That's 8 p.m. Central Time, to discuss this podcast episode lesson, exploring jazz improvisation exercises for A-flat altered sounds in greater detail, and, of course, to answer any questions that you may have regarding the study of jazz. And, of course, if you have any questions, you can always reach me by phone, 972-380-8050. My office extension here at the Dallas School of Music is 211. That number again is 972-380-8050, extension 211. You can also reach me by email, Dr. Lawrence, drlawrence, @jazzpianoskills.com, or you can use the nifty little SpeakPipe widget that is found throughout the Jazz Piano Skills website. Well, there's my cue. That's it for now. And until next week, enjoy the jazz improvisation exercises for A-flat altered sounds. And most of all, have fun as you discover, learn, and play jazz piano.